The empire in the clouds that the Inca tried to erase began as a rumor whispered in the high, suffocating altitudes of the Andes, a story of people who didn't belong to the mountains they ruled. When the Spanish conquistadors first pushed into the vertical jungles of northern Peru, they didn't find the stoic, sun-baked faces of the Inca they had grown accustomed to conquering. Instead, they encountered men and women who were startlingly tall, with skin as pale as the mist that clings to the peaks, and hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. This wasn't just a local myth or a colonial exaggeration. It was a physical contradiction that shouldn't have existed in a pre-Columbian world isolated by thousands of miles of ocean. Every civilization leaves a fingerprint, but the Chachapoya left a scar on the landscape that defies the basic laws of logistics. High above the Marañón River, where the air is too thin to breathe comfortably and the cliffs dropping to 1,000-foot nothingness, they built Kuelap. It is a fortress city wrapped in a limestone wall 60 feet high, containing over 400 circular stone houses perched on a ridge that seems physically impossible to access. We like to imagine ancient peoples as primitive or limited by their tools, but when you stand at the base of Kuelap, you realize they weren't just building a city, they were hiding from something. Or perhaps they were ensuring that no one from the world below could ever reach them. But here's the problem. To build a wall of that scale at 10,000 feet, you need a workforce, a massive caloric surplus, and a reason to move millions of tons of stone up a vertical incline. The Inca, the masters of the mountains, eventually broke them, but it took the entire might of an empire to do it. Even then, the Inca didn't just want to defeat the Chachapoya, they wanted to delete them. They forcibly relocated tens of thousands of these cloud people to the far reaches of the empire, trying to dilute their bloodline and silence their history. You have to wonder what it was about these people that terrified the most powerful empire in the Americas so much that they tried to scrub them from the face of the earth. If you look closer at the cliff faces surrounding their territory, the mystery stops being about architecture and starts feeling like a nightmare. Tucked into shallow caves on sheer rock walls are the Purunmachus, 6-foot-tall sarcophagi made of clay, wood, and grass, sculpted into the likeness of human figures. They sit in rows, perched on ledges that are unreachable without modern climbing gear and carbon fiber ropes. They have oversized heads and prominent jaws, staring out over the valleys with a cold, vacant gaze that has lasted for 800 years. They aren't just coffins, they are sentinels. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. When researchers finally managed to reach some of these burial sites, they didn't just find bones, they found evidence of a culture that was obsessed with the preservation of the physical form in a way that feels deeply alien to the surrounding Andean cultures. In the Lake of the Condors, archaeologists pulled over 200 mummies from the cliffs. These weren't just dried-out remains, they were intricately prepared, their internal organs removed through the anus, their skin preserved with resins, and their faces frozen in expressions of eternal silence. The Chachapoya weren't just burying their dead, they were keeping them present, as if the border between the living and the ghosts in the clouds didn't actually exist. No, seriously, think about this. How do you get a 6-foot clay statue weighing hundreds of pounds onto a ledge that has no path, no handholds, and sits 500 feet above a canyon floor? There are no records of cranes, no evidence of massive scaffolding. It's as if they simply stepped onto the cliff face from the air. We try to explain it away with talk of complex rope systems, but that's just something we say to make ourselves feel smarter than the people who came before us. The reality is, we don't know how they did it. And looking at those grinning clay faces, you get the distinct feeling they aren't planning on telling us. The deeper we go into the genetics of the region, the more the story begins to fracture. Modern DNA testing on the descendants of the Northern Highlands shows a distinct European-like signature that predates the Spanish arrival. This has led to fringe theories about Carthaginians or Celts crossing the Atlantic, fleeing the expansion of Rome, only to find refuge in the most inaccessible place on the planet. While mainstream archaeology recoils at the idea of transoceanic contact, the physical evidence remains.
Tall, light-skinned, red-haired warriors living in the Peruvian clouds, while the rest of the world thought the Americas were an empty void. But hence yet, the Chachapoya were not a peaceful utopian society of refugees. They were famously fierce, described by the Inca as warriors of the mist. Their cities are filled with stone sling stones and defensive fortifications that suggest a state of perpetual high-altitude warfare. They didn't just live in the clouds for the view, they lived there because the ground was a slaughterhouse. They were the last holdouts, the people who refused to bow to the sun god of the Inca, and when they finally fell, they did so with a bitterness that changed the course of history. But the problem with the refugee narrative is that if they were fleeing something from across the sea, why choose the Andes? Why build circular homes that look more like the hill forts of northern Europe than anything found in the Amazon or the Pacific? The architectural language of the Chachapoya is a lonely dialect. It doesn't borrow from the Moche or the Nazca or the Tiwanaku. It stands alone, a singular, defiant statement of "we are not like you." It makes you realize that our timeline of human migration might not just be incomplete, it might be fundamentally wrong. The tension between what we see and what we can prove reaches a breaking point when you look at the skulls. Many of the Chachapoya remains show evidence of trepanation, ancient brain surgery. They were drilling holes into the living bone to relieve pressure or perhaps to let something out. Some of these patients survived for years after the procedure, evidenced by the healing of the bone. This wasn't primitive hacking, it was a calculated medical intervention performed at the edge of the world. They possessed a knowledge of anatomy and antiseptic plants that seems entirely out of sync with their isolation. No, seriously, think about this. You are a warrior surgeon living on a cliffside, performing cranial surgery with obsidian blades, surrounded by the mummified remains of your ancestors, who are literally watching you from the walls above. It's a scene of such high-strung intensity that it feels more like science fiction than history. And then the Inca arrive. They don't just want your land, they want your soul. They take your children, they burn your records, and they leave you to rot in the mist until the Spanish show up to finish the job. The twist in the story of the Cloud People isn't that they disappeared, it's that they chose to help the Spanish. When Pizarro arrived, the remnants of the Chachapoya saw an opportunity for revenge against their Incan oppressors. They became the scouts and the shock troops for the conquistadors, guiding the Europeans through the mountain passes they knew so well. They thought they were winning their freedom back. Instead, they welcomed in a biological apocalypse. Within a few decades of the Spanish arrival, 90% of the Chachapoya were dead, not from swords, but from smallpox and measles. The warriors of the mist were finally defeated by an enemy they couldn't see or fight. Today, Kuelap is crumbling. A massive section of the Great Wall collapsed recently, as if the mountain itself is tired of holding up the weight of a forgotten people. We still don't know where they came from. We still don't know how they moved the stones, and we certainly don't know why they looked the way they did. The jungle is slowly reclaiming the circular houses, and the Purunmachus continue to stare out over the valleys, their clay skin cracking under the relentless Andean sun. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. We like to think that history is a straight line of progress, that we are the peak of the mountain. But the Chachapoya suggests something different. They suggest that entire chapters of the human story can be written in high definition, lived with intense complexity, and then completely erased until only a few tall ghosts remain in the fog. We are left looking at their cliffside coffins, wondering if they were the last survivors of a world we never knew, or the first victims of the world we currently inhabit. The clouds haven't given up their secrets yet, and as the ruins continue to slide into the abyss, they likely never will.